Chapter. Must be 9:58. I am. Morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual gathering of Summit Unitarian Universalist Fellowship's Sunday worship service. We are still in our separate homes and on our separate screens, but this morning I'm coming to you from our sanctuary, and I am very excited because I wasn't really sure what this was all going to look like, and I'm beginning to see what it is all going to look like and how it's going to work. So we are getting close, so it's very exciting. I just wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this morning's service, and we will stop recording after the service for our community gathering. And now, to help us enter into the spirit of worship, let us calm our minds and our hearts and listen to our prelude. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning. This morning I'm in the topic of categories and breaking categories. I chose a piece by Philip Glass that's called an etude, which in the past has kind of meant a study or a piece of virtuosity, and it's anything but that. It's very calming, and it also he upends the idea that 7/8 time is something that would be irregular. He has a regular pulse, but it actually feels very calming. So I tried to find something to fit today's topic, and this is as close as I could get, was Philip Glass. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome again to the Sunday morning virtual worship service of Summit UU Fellowship. We here at Summit, we are a liberal religious community bound by shared principles that are drawn from world religions, humanist teachings, nature, science, philosophy, and personal practices. We are a religion of love and inclusion. Our mission here at Summit is to commit ourselves to building a more compassionate, just, and sustainable world. If you're new to Unitarian Universalism or to Summit and would like to know more about us, we invite you to go to our website, summituuf.org. Click on the visitors button and fill out an online connection card, and someone will happily get in touch with you. We also want to acknowledge that our fellowship physically resides on unceded Kumeyaay land, and that for more than 10,000 years, this land has been and continues to be home to the Kumeyaay people. We recognize the violent history of the colonization in California and honor the legacy of the continuing presence of the Kumeyaay Nation. This morning, with us we have Reverend Casey Kvasnička-Slack. She is our assistant minister for Pastoral Care here at Summit, and she is also the minister of the UU Church in Verdugo Hills, just outside of Los Angeles. So we welcome her this morning. One other small piece of business, we just want to let people know that if you're on Zoom and you're having a hard time hearing, there is a closed captioning live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. All you have to do is push it, and Zoom will do everything for you, and the text of what we're saying will actually be presented at the bottom of the screen. So we just want everyone to know that that's available to you. We're glad that you've joined us here at Summit this morning. It's going to be a little bit different because our pledge drive is starting soon. We have one announcement, and then we're going to have three speakers this morning. So to begin, I'd like to introduce Carol Schnaubelt. She has an announcement this morning about the pledge drive. Carol?
Hi, everybody. I'm Carol. I'd like to remind you once again that our pledge kickoff picnic is scheduled for March 26th. It's a Saturday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's in 2 weeks. It's going to be held outdoors in the Summit parking lot. So we'd suggest that you plan to carpool because parking's going to be limited because we're going to be using up most of the parking lot. Also, since we're meeting outdoors, we still need a few things. So I'm asking that if anyone has an extra shade structure or a canopy that they can loan us for that day, that would be very helpful because we want to provide enough shade. And also we need some ice chests with ice so we can keep the drinks cold. So if you have any of those to loan, that would be great. We also need a couple of volunteers the day of. Mark Weedman, our beloved property steward, is doing all the hard work. He's setting up the tables and the shade structures and the chairs. But the day of, we need people to help with like decorating and serving and things like that. And then also we need a few people to maybe pick up do a little shopping for us. So if you're willing and able, could you let Serafina Galante know? She's coordinating, and I'll put her email address and her phone number so you can text or call her and let her know if you're able to do that. Also, we need an idea of how many vegetarians or vegans we have coming so that we order enough of the right kinds of foods. So again, if you'll RSVP that information to Serafina, that would be really helpful. So I hope you'll come. I hope you'll bring your pledge and visit with everyone outside and take a baby step towards coming home and coming back to Summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. As part of us getting ready for the pledge drive, which kicks off on the 26th, we traditionally allow our members to give testimonials as to why Summit is close to their heart, important to them, and worthy of their generous financial support. So this morning we're going to do 3 of those people. I'd like to begin by introducing Pat Brining. Pat, if you'd like to unmute yourself. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. Yes, I've been asked to speak briefly on why Summit's important enough to continue to support it financially, and so I jotted down a few thoughts. After having had a devastating year, I joined Summit. Mark and I truly got an empty nest when our daughter moved to Washington, D.C. in August of 2001. The next month was September 11th. Then the anthrax scare, then the sniper, all of which affected her personally and scared us half to death. That November, my mother died, and in December, my work position, a job which I truly loved, was eliminated. I was lost. In the winter of early 2002, we came to Summit, and we were not only warmly welcomed, but felt wanted. It was wonderful to find a place where it felt like everyone was welcome, and it was warm and friendly. I soon joined a couple of adult RE classes, and the minister, Reverend Ned White, took us under his care and made us feel part of this community. In a couple of years, Ned and some of us started the covenant groups, which helped me feel an important part of the community. And gradually I was encouraged, not pressured, to become involved in other things like other classes, the choir, the recorder group, a board member, committee on ministry, and the Sunday services committee. I'm still a part of some of these committees. As they say, of war, it's sometimes easier to get into committees than out of them. After Reverend Ned left, Summit has experienced several ministers, and we at Summit have maintained being a strong and caring congregation through all of the changes during these times. It's been inspiring to watch and to be a part of. We are a mighty group. As I said, I never felt any pressure to become involved, just encouraged, and that has felt good. This has also been true of monetary pledging. Mark and I never felt pressured to give a certain amount, and the pledging part made sense to us. We found that Summit's been a most generous congregation, unlike some others we were aware of. Most people pledge what they can, and when Summit has been in a time of need, most people have managed to give a little more. Giving has always felt like something that we wanted to do because Summit has been such a wonderful spiritual home to us. We at Summit have been guided by a wise finance committee, and we believe that every dollar is watched over carefully. It feels good to give what we can. I hope that others of you feel similar to us about Summit and about giving. This is going to be a financially difficult year, but we've always pulled through difficult times, and I feel confident that this year will be no different. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. Another member that would like to speak this morning is Jamie Cleland. Jamie, are you there? Well, we can't seem to find Jamie. Luckily, we have one other
Sorry.
speaker. So
Jamie, you should be able to unmute now.
There we go.
There he is.
Seem to have lost the video feed. Anyway, I've been a member of Summit for 25 years now. My wife and I joined initially when our kids were young teens, and we needed a place where we could get the peer and adult support they needed beyond what our own family could give them. They needed a safe, open, and caring place to grow socially and spiritually and see them through those difficult teen years. Summit's RE program, at the time entirely lay-led, was the perfect place. But I soon discovered that I too benefited from both socially and spiritually. Since day one, I've appreciated the many adult role models here at Summit who, through their sharing, demonstrated a strength and humanity that I wasn't necessarily seeing a lot of in my everyday life. Some of those people are still members, like Rod Orth and Carolyn Wendell Rollins, and I owe them all deep gratitude. And that hasn't changed over the years. Just about every Sunday, someone says something that opens my eyes and my heart a little wider. And the inspiration I've gotten from our teens over the years has been amazing. Mary's RE program is outstanding, and I love the way she makes RE relevant to each service. After Karen died 8 years ago, Summit was here to see me through my grief and my loneliness. And I found my new love here. One thing I've noticed over the years, Summit has had the courage and the leadership to stretch beyond its comfort zone to achieve key milestones. Calling our first settled minister, Ned White, was a big stretch. And we made it work, and we grew. Some years later, I was active in the stretch that was necessary to find our permanent home here in Santee. And again, we made it work. Many people rose to the occasion and turned a small strip mall into a spiritual home. Now I believe strongly it's time to stretch again to call a new settled minister. I know we have budget concerns, but we've always had budget concerns, and we made it work. Let's make it work again. It will take a commitment and flexibility. For example, we may not be able to offer as much compensation as we would like at first, but the right candidate will see the potential here and stretch a little themselves. We'll make it work together. Thanks.
Jamie? I'd also like to introduce Rin Corbet this morning. Good morning, Rin.
Thank you, Josh. It's so great to be back in the sanctuary. It's such a wonderful feeling to be back in this space after first time in several years. Although there are only 4 of us here this morning, but those 4, Josh, Mary, Patrick, I'd like to thank. Also, I'd like to thank Reverend KC, Karen, Tyler, Dan, Pat, Mark Brining, Pat spoke, Jamie, Joanne. I could just stop there and say that's why I come to Summit, these people. But because I'm a poet, I wrote something. When I have something important to say, I find that it's easier for me to say it in a poem, something from my heart. This is my testimony. There is nothing I can say that will make a difference. There's everything you can do that will make a difference. What is the difference? You know why you are here. Words leave our lips and are dropped like so many bombs. Smoke rises, confusion, chaos. That's not what I meant. I mean, you still like me though? We were friends before, were we? What's the difference? I hate the difference. Will you marry me? Till death do us part. I will until I won't. You take the kids and the dog. I listen to the wrong people. I'm so ashamed. Do I deserve to be helped? I'll listen to the right people. We will all die in the end. Here's a thought. If you contemplate infinity, will you live forever? I did, and I didn't. Yesterday I counted and got to about 14 years from now, and gave up. It almost killed me, terrified that it would never end. Luckily, my partner lives in the moment and dragged me back. You see, she cares. Take a chessboard. Start at one corner and place 1 grain of rice on a square. Then move to the next and place 2 on a square. Then move to the next and place twice that amount on a square. Continue until all 64 squares are filled. More rice than stars in the sky. That's a difference. There's nothing I can say that will make a difference. There's everything you can do that will make a difference. You know why you are here. This morning, you smiled at me, and I felt something. And I smiled at the next person, and the one after that. And then I lost count. Thank you, Summit.
Thank you for that, Rin. Thank you to Jamie. Thank you to Pat. And now let's begin our service by lighting our chalice. We seek our place in the world and the answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. May the light of our chalice remind us that this is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and of welcoming of multiple truths. And now please join us muted for our UU hymn.
bajo el gran sol, sur esperanza, fe, amor, verdad y belleza cantando de cada tierra, cada voz.
From all who dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land, by every tongue.
And now please join me, while still muted on Zoom, for our UU aspiration. May love be the spirit of this fellowship. May the quest for truth be its sacrament, and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration. And now, time for all ages. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I have a story for you today. And this story is based on a folk tale from a country that's on the other side of the globe from us. So here's California, way over here. And this comes from the country way over here. On this globe, it says Burma, but it's also known as Myanmar. So this is based on a folk tale about the birds in the jungle or the forest. Now there are, in that particular country, 1,062 different species of birds. That's a lot of birds. And the country is smaller than California, so you can imagine that many birds. And there's one particular bird that's featured in this story that I looked up, and it was a bird I've never seen before. It's very cool. And Patrick, can you put that bird picture in for us? Okay, there it is. So that is a pheasant that kind of looks like a peacock, doesn't it? They call it the peacock pheasant of Myanmar peacock pheasant. And this bird is, move my chair over a little bit so we can see the bird, is one of the loved birds of the country. So let me tell you this story. And this is from Ancient Stories for Modern Times by Faye Morgensen. So all these birds lived in this jungle, 1,062 different species of birds. And they lived in the jungles and the wetlands and along the coast. And once upon a time, these birds did not get along. You see, they were always arguing with each other, and they didn't like the differences that they saw. So they'd be like, well, you hummingbirds flap your wings too fast, would be something that the sparrows might say. Or, your feathers are too red, you parrots. With that technique, you'll never be able to catch a worm, the worm eaters might say to a bug eater. So the birds often got so carried away with what they said, they were basically saying, I'm a better bird than you. No, I'm a better bird than you. And there was a lot of diversity, and they were all different, and they all had different things to do in the jungle, but they were just so excited about who they were that they never took a time to look at the other birds. They just argued. So there was no friendship amongst them until finally the pheasant, the one in the story, the peacock pheasant, got weary of this. The bird didn't want to quarrel, so they decided to try something different. So one day Crow came along and was hanging out near Peacock and decided to pick an argument and said the crow was ready to go, and the pheasant said, Crow, you're a better bird than me. Well, this startled Crow. Crow was surprised. Those words warmed Crow's heart, and Crow replied politely, No, Pheasant, you're a better bird than me. So Pheasant's heart felt warm, and the two struck up a conversation. And they got to know one another, and they found that they did get along very well. And before long, they decided to build their nests near each other so they could be neighbors. The two birds enjoyed one another very much. Now their conversations were completely different than they had been in the days of argument. One day Pheasant stood stock still, and Crow noticed and said, That was a good way to avoid being seen by enemies. And another time when Crow was building a nest, Pheasant said, Those sticks will make a good strong nest. Have you ever thought about how to make your nest softer inside? And Crow looked at the nest and then thought about the downy feathers that would fall out of their chest and added some to the nest. So they would talk and get along, and it made it easy for them to learn from one another. Crow learned how to put feathers in the nest, and Pheasant would hear stories from Crow from what they could see upon high because the pheasant couldn't fly. So they had a wonderful friendship that became affection for one another, and it was obvious to the other birds. Now this surprised the other birds. How could Pheasant and Crow spend so much time together? They weren't quarreling, they were very different. That's so different. So the birds were upset by this. So they decided to test the friendship. So one of the other crows went up to Crow and said, Crow, why do you spend so much time with Pheasant? Why do you spend so much time with that good-for-nothing pheasant? And Crow said, Oh, you mustn't say that, Crow said. Pheasant is a better bird than I am. The pheasants tried this along with Pheasant as well. They said, Pheasant, how come you're hanging out with that no-good crow? And again, Pheasant said, Oh, please don't say that. Crow honors me with his friendship. Well, the birds were deeply impressed by Crow and Pheasant and their attitudes towards one another. And they began to wonder, why do we always fight and quarrel? They watched how Crow and Pheasant treated one another and soon learned that it wasn't so difficult to be kind. They also learned that when they practiced compassion in the manner of Crow and Pheasant, life was more enjoyable. And so that is how friendship developed amongst the birds in the jungles and forests of Myanmar and Burma. So I hope you enjoyed that story, and I hope it makes you think about when you find yourself divided from other folks because of things that maybe someone's told you or Maybe just like, I don't like that person because they're wearing a pink top. Just to think about what that person is, who that person is, and to find out more like Crow and Pheasant did. You might learn how to put feathers in your nest or be able to hear stories from places you can't go. So I hope you enjoyed that story and it makes you think about how we treat each other. And treating each other with kindness is a really important thing to do. So thank you for listening this morning.
Now, if I could invite Reverend Casey to come on screen.
Thank you. I invite you all to join me in a moment of grounding, to take a deep breath if that's what works for you, maybe to stretch a little bit if you're feeling a little tense from maybe not enough sleep last night. Maybe for you, having something to fidget with helps you feel a little more grounded. Maybe you need to stand up and walk around a little bit. You're mostly in your home, so whatever you need to do is going to be just fine. It's so important to get a moment to ground ourselves in such busy and constantly stimulating weeks, to take the time together to acknowledge our connection, to feel, though still separated in body, connected in care, connected in spirit, connected in community. It's so important to take this time to acknowledge the beauty of our shared community of people from different experiences of the world coming together in the spirit of love. So we take this time to ground ourselves, to be as present as we're able this morning. So that when we go back out into the world, away from one another, we are able to carry with us our shared commitments, our shared values, our love for one another, and for this complicated, beautiful world. I invite you to take another deep breath or another stretch, or to find your knitting or crochet if that's going to help you be present during the rest of our service together. And just breathe and let yourself be, knowing that you are enough, that you are loved, that you are beloved in the universe, that you matter, and that what you do matters too. Amen.
Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home.
Summit is a fellowship that is supported entirely by the voluntary generosity of our members and friends, and we greatly appreciate our faithful pledgers who continue to keep up their monthly contributions. If you've been moved to support Summit today, I invite you to contribute to our virtual plate by going to the website summituuf.org. The website can be found in the chat box. Look for the Summit logo on the homepage. The donate button is right below the logo. And now we will gratefully accept your generous donations during Karen's second morning interlude. Good morning again, Karen.
Good morning. I'm going to play The Wayfaring Stranger, arranged by Mark Hayes.
Thank you, Karen. A disproportionate number of astronauts are from my home state of Ohio. Not the most astronauts, well, not anymore. In recent years, New York and California have overtaken Ohio in how many in pure numbers. But New York State and California are rather more populated than Ohio, and a total of 25 astronauts so far have been residents of the state of Ohio, people who call that place home. I like to joke that the escape velocity of Ohio, the speed you have to get up to get out at all, is so intense that sometimes, if you're not paying attention, or maybe if you're paying a lot of attention, you accidentally wind up on the moon. Of course, that can't be the real reason. That can't be all of it. And I've never gotten an opportunity to speak with any of these 25 astronauts who share my home state, but I too fell in love with the stars in dark nights in Ohio as a child. I grew up somewhere with so little light pollution that I could easily go into the backyard and stare up at the sky. And I remember doing that over and over throughout my life. Sneaking out of my parents' house in the middle of the night as a child and a teenager, not to get into any trouble, but just to sit in the grass and stare at the stars. Taking trips with my family into darker portions of the state, places with even less light pollution, up little hills, we don't really have mountains in Ohio, to observatories where we would seek out planets that were visible. Spending time staring out my bedroom window at the moon, tracking the phases of the moon with my parents. Space has always held this enormous sense of reverence for me, has been this wonder off in the distance that makes me feel both so special and lucky to get to be seeing this, and also so small and insignificant, just a piece of a much bigger story. Astronauts report again and again an experience of what is now sometimes called the overview effect. The overview effect is a cognitive shift in awareness reported by some astronauts during spaceflight, often while viewing the Earth. It's the experience of seeing firsthand the reality of Earth in space, which is then immediately understood to be a tiny, fragile ball of life hanging in the void, shielded and nourished by a paper-thin atmosphere. The effect might invoke a sense of transcendence and connection with humanity. It's a vantage point from which national borders appear petty. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, astronauts Michael Collins, Rusty Schweickart, Edgar Mitchell, James Irwin, Tom Jones, Ron Guerin, Scott Kelly, Mike Massimo, Andre Coopers, Chris Hadfield, Sally Ride, Annie McLean, and space tourist William Shatner are all reported to have experienced the overview effect. Michael Collins, an astronaut from the Apollo 11 mission, wrote that the thing that really surprised him was that Earth projected an air of fragility. He writes, and why, I don't know. I don't know to this day. I had a feeling it's tiny, it's shiny, it's beautiful, it's home, and it's fragile. On the International Space Station, astronauts and other types of spacefarers from around the world report yet another layer of transcendence and dissolution of boundaries, as their very survival on the International Space Station requires that they work together without regard for national origin or much of anything else. When you are a small group of people in a place that you could not survive without a functioning ship, well, everything else matters quite a lot less. And yet, even from space, some of our borders, some of the things that we as humans have created through our choices are visible. A 2017 Time article titled simply, "See Images of International Borders Taken from Space," shows some places around the world where the borders are visible, where you can see the imaginary lines we have drawn in the earth to separate one country from the next. The difference between North and South Korea is stark. South Korea is lit brightly, just as bright as any densely populated part of the planet. Shines the same as Los Angeles does at night, the same as New York City does at night, the same as Paris and London and Tokyo do at night. While North Korea is dark, no light emits past that border. On the border between Israel and Egypt, there is a road, a singular dirt road along the line that we have drawn. To the north, where you find Israel, there are grasses and signs of agriculture. To the south, where you find Egypt, there is sand and evidence of herds of animals having been led through the area. Though it has been years since the formal end of the Cold War, the visual reminders of the space between East and West in that time remain. You can see the borders between East and West Germany from space. The difference between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, countries that share one island, are stark. The Dominican Republic is lush and green and full of big trees. Haiti is sparse, much more brown, a result of severe overforesting. The border between India and Pakistan is a strip of darkness between two brightly lit countries, two heavily populated places with a stark and intense border. In what was in not too distant past just one country. The borders between Iraq and Iran are so distinct that astronauts initially believed they were seeing the ruins of an ancient city. In fact, what they are seeing is military embankments on each side, the ways two somewhat volatile powers have lined up as to be always ready for war. The border between the United States and Mexico is also visible from space, and not just because a river runs through it. In many places, you can see not only that it is cut apart, that nobody lives too near to it, but that it is much more developed on the United States side. There are more and brighter lights, though if you look, you can tell that there are still many people on the other side. We can see some of our borders, some of these decisions that we have made in space. In September of 2015, Aisha Siddiqui, a Los Angeles-based writer and creative strategist, wrote, "Every border implies the violence of its maintenance. Every border implies the violence of its creation and its maintenance. Even the ones we can't see from space, ones that are hard to see from up close, show us where we have fractured the earth, where we have decided that land, which is its own, can belong to anyone at all. And while it is certainly reasonable to administer things on a slightly smaller scale, we do to consider what it means to draw these lines, to build these categories that say, this is me and that is you, and we do not meet. We might touch, but we don't connect. Categories are complicated, and a nation is only a category. As humans, we need some amount of category making to be done so that we can understand anything at all. As human beings with human brains, we are amazing at finding patterns. We are amazing at creating categories. But while it's really important to be able to notice patterns and pull out categories if what you are worried about is a tiger exiting the jungle as to eat you or your children, it is maybe a little less important to know where the exact boundaries are between each and every person. It is maybe the case that we are over good at. We are a little too equipped to notice patterns, a little too equipped to make categories. In my life, that categorization, the violence of being squished into a box that makes sense to other people, has arrived again and again and again. I think we all have those experiences of being boxed in, of being asked to cut ourselves apart so we fit into a shape that makes sense to other people, so we are manageable in a way. These boxes limit our creativity, limit our ability to express ourselves fully tell us, because you look like this, you must be that. Because you come from here, you must do this. Because you've been this, you can't be that. Every border implies the violence of its maintenance. And though we need categories, sometimes we are wrong about them. Sometimes we have drawn the line in a place that doesn't actually make any sense when we look again. Lulu Miller, a founder of NPR's Invisibilia, learns a similar thing in her 2020 book, Why Fish Don't Exist, a story of loss, love, and the hidden order of life. Dealing with her own abruptly unraveling life, Miller becomes deeply invested in learning more about David Starr Jordan, the founding president of Stanford University and the ichthyologist credited with discovering nearly a fifth of all fish that were known in his time. Starr Jordan goes around collecting different species of fish and amasses this vast and impressive collection. He identified a fifth of all fish known in his time and had samples of each of those fish. He perseveres through all kinds of nonsense, including losing a significant portion of that collection to fires and earthquakes. And Miller takes that as an indication that she should persevere in her desire to rekindle the relationship whose end set off her exploration of fish in the first place. It turns out, though, as you unfortunately might expect of a notable American biologist at the turn of the 20th century, that David Starr Jordan was a dedicated eugenicist. He, like Darwin's own cousin, Francis Galton, took the phrase survival of the fittest, took the concept of evolution to mean that there was a hierarchy of the natural order, that there was not only an order, but a list, top to bottom, most to least important. Rather than saying, wow, there are all of these organisms and they all do different things, have different places in this vast ecosystem. This approach, an approach that was dominant in late 19th and early 20th century thinking, that is still deep in how we have built the categories for life. They identified it with dominance. They identified humanity as the goal of evolution rather than just something that happened. They assumed that survival of the fittest meant whoever is the most fit will survive, rather than if there's a niche and you fit into it, then you are likely to survive. Or the traits that get passed on are the ones that are most suited to the environment that a creature finds itself in at the time. From this perspective, Starr Jordan went about categorizing fish, saying which is what, building out a broader taxonomy that turns out to not make any sense at all. You see, there's no such thing as a fish. Well, that's not true. We have the category fish and it means something, but it doesn't mean what you might think it means. The creatures we call fish are no more related to one another than you and I are to a lizard. A similar term applied to land creatures might just be landies. It would cover all of us. You can see this history if you just pay attention to what is considered a fish. It took us a really long time to decide that whales and dolphins and sea lions weren't themselves fish. But the rest of the creatures we call fish are also not necessarily that closely related. And often, in reality, things that we think are the same are completely unrelated genetically. For example, many types of crabs are not related to crabs. There is a thing in nature where anything that could become a crab seems to be going to become a crab. We are also pretty wrong about our categorizations of trees. Palm trees, for example, are in fact grass. We are wrong about the colors that we see. The color magenta is a fiction your brain makes up when it sees wavelengths reflected that it cannot process. You can't actually see the color yellow either. You do not have cones in your eyes that receive that wavelength of light. The cones in your eyes are red, green, and blue. Those are the colors you can see. Everything else your brain has made up. There is no such thing as a fish. Every border implies the violence of its maintenance. The world is vastly more chaotic than we are completely prepared for it to be. And so I asked us this morning, what happens when we let go of the fish? What do we get to do when we let go of the categories that say, I'm over here and you're over there, and never the two shall meet? What happens when we stop thinking about borders in a way that causes us to make them visible from space? As Lulu Miller progresses in her thinking, after learning that David Starr Jordan was a eugenicist, she realizes that she cannot model her life after him, that she cannot take his life as a sign that she needs to keep pushing. She realizes something about the end of that relationship. You see, she had been in a long-term relationship with a man, and she had cheated on that man with a woman. And in her attempts to get back to that relationship, she realizes that she had built some pretty intense categories for herself, that she had become so involved in understanding herself as straight and understanding straight as preferable, that she had missed that maybe she did that because she wanted to, because she was attracted to a woman. In the end, she winds up dating that very woman who she cheated on her initial partner with. And while I can't recommend her method of approaching this, she learned some really important stuff about categories. Some things that I think we could all do to internalize right now. Some fish worth letting go of. Amen. Blessed be.
We would be one, as now we join in singing our hymn of love, to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding. our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free.
Thank you, Reverend Casey. Mary, would you help me please extinguish the chalice as I read these words? Blessed is the path on which you travel. Blessed is the body that carries you upon it. Blessed is your heart that has heard the call. Blessed is your mind that discerns the way. Blessed is the gift that you will receive by going. Truly blessed is the gift that you will become on the journey. May you go forth in peace.
Together, hand in hand, in fellowship we stand. Before we go, we'll share the flow of standing hand in hand. Together, hand in hand, in fellowship we stand. Through laughter, tears, through hopes and fears, together we shall stand.
Are we hot?